Alright, so I'm okay. So, hello, Professor. This is my submission for the final demo. I apologize if there are like any background noises or just like weird pauses or things like that happening in the background. I apologize for this. It's more likely than not just like me reading my script or just like some weird thing happening in the background. But besides that, I hope you enjoy this submission, or if you're one of the graders, I hope you also enjoy this submission as well. So primarily what I am focusing on is just simply this. So this is all of like my files right here inside of my project folder and other things like that. And now I'm just going to demonstrate like a lot of the features within this chat room project itself, because that is sorry, I should have clarified that from the beginning. So my name is Omar Hassan. This is my UC ID is OAH. And this specifically, the project that I have chosen is the chat room project with all of the features such as roll, flip, and all of that stuff. And right now, I'm just going to simply demonstrate a few of those features for the demonstration itself. So first, what I'm going to do and is just basically like run a few commands and then like go on to explain how each of these commands like operate at like a high level, or at the very least like at a general level. That way whoever's watching could understand at least get a general idea of how it functions specifically. So first I'm going to build my project, as you can see. So let me just build it. All right, so now everything is compiling within the project itself. Just give it a moment. So using the build script that Professor Tokol has given us, I'm now just going to compile all of the code so that it will actually be runnable within my project folder. And now I'm going to first start using the run script as well in order to run the rest of my files in addition to that. Okay, so first I'm going to run the server file because that's the most essential file. So as you can see, a few things have popped up right now. I'm going to just describe a few of those things first. The primary thing is that like the server listens on localhost itself. It listen, excuse me, sorry. Okay, so one my sorry, one primary thing is that the server listens on the local host, or basically on the actual like local device that you're on from your own device. So, and it listens specifically on port 3000 on your own machine, which then allows clients running on the same network or device to connect by specifying the address, or specifically the like port number and also the IP address. And in addition to that, another thing about the server itself is that when it comes to accepting connections, when a client connects, the server accepts the connection using the server socket dot accept method, and the method blocks until a client attempts to connect, ensuring proper synchronization. Another thing as well that is very important for the client interactions with the server itself is thread management. So when a client actually connects within the server wraps the connection in a server thread object and then it stores it as a separate thread. This ensures that the client operates independently without blocking others. And I should possibly run the client right now in order to just get a few things over with. But I'll just like brush up on a few extra things on like how the server actually interacts with the client. So another way is that like the server also like assigns a unique client ID to each of the clients during the on client initialized callback. The ID is sent to the client, establishing a unique identity for communication. And room management is also another thing. Clients are initially like added into the lobby room, and then the server uses join room to handle moving clients between rooms while ensuring thread safe operations. And finally, data flow. When clients send data or messages, the server processes it and uses the room class to broadcast the message towards everyone else inside of the room or in the same room at the same time. Also, like server is also responsible for room creation and management, as well as just shutting down or just like disconnecting clients as well. So now I'm going to move on to the client by actually connecting my client. So as you can see, the client is now connected and is actually listening. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Or rather, now it's actually interacting with the server itself. It's actually waiting for a genuine input and listening for inputs as well. So to expand more on the actual relationship between the server and the client, I'm going to dive in on like how the general features of the client and what it actually does as well, and how it interacts with the server. So one thing is that the client interacts with the server by sending and receiving data packets encapsulated as payloads. These payloads represent different types of actions or information such as messages, client connection requests, or room management commands based on like the type of payload and also the name of the payload as well. The client also initiates communication through a socket connection and transmits data to the server, which processes the payload and sends back an appropriate response. So if I were to send a message payload through the client, the server will then be able to like actually receive that message payload, and then it would actually follow accordingly with the logic associated with it, which would just simply be like sending out a message inside of the room because of like the payload being sent from the client. So obviously the client wants to send out a message, so then the server like follows up with that logically and then serves that message based off of the payload. In general, the client also handles user actions and interactions, translating them into structured payloads and sends them into the server. It also processes server responses to update its local state, such as maintaining a list of connected clients, handling room join or leave events, or displaying received messages. And it also displays real-time communication. So now I'm going to try running the UI as well. So hopefully this will work. Sorry, let me just. Alright, there we go. Whew, I was almost worried for a little bit. So as you can see, I'm connecting through my local host right here, and I'm also connecting through my port number as well. So as I mentioned before, like how come basically the server is listening on this specific local host and as well as like this specific port number 3000. So I'm also going to describe a few things about the UI as well, like how come it serves as the central user interface for interacting with client-side application. It also integrates with the client logic through things and interfaces like the iConnection events, iMessage events, and the iRoom events, all of which allow the client UI and the client file or class itself to actually interact with one another. And these interfaces basically act as like a bridge between the core client functionality and the visual representation, allowing client UI to display messages, manage room actions, and handle connection updates. Yeah. A genuine example would be like when the client sends or receives data such as a message or room update, client UI reacts to methods like the on message receive, which then updates the chat panel with a new message. So basically, it's like whenever the client itself sends a payload, the client UI also the client UI also responds logically towards that payload, just like how the server does it in a similar fashion. Not exactly the same way, of course, but in like a somewhat of a similar fashion. And it reacts to specific methods within the client UI, like I mentioned before, as like the on message receive. So now I'm just going to connect, and here you can see I can actually name myself. So now I'm going to call myself David. And now as you can see, I'm inside of the panel itself. So let me just try to run these other commands as well. Okay. Okay, there we go. So now I'm going to open up these two as well. And I'm gonna call this one Joe, and also call this one, I named one David already, so let's call this one Bob. Okay. So as you can see, like it shows like right down here. How come like sorry, excuse me. Mm, Sorry, Professor. It's just a little bit late right now. Okay. Huh. So as you can see, like a few of the features of the UI is that we're inside of a lobby right now. We're able to like do different things such as like search within a room and also create a room itself right now. However, I'll get to that like possibly I'll get to that like later. However, I'm just going to go back right here. Okay. So I just wanted to demonstrate a few of the main features, specifically like the ones that we have implemented through the milestones. So the first feature I want to demonstrate is specifically the role feature. Or rather, actually, let's start off with something more simpler and try the flip feature instead. So I'm just going to make sure that I can actually type. And as you can see, the message is broadcasted within the room towards all of the clients within the same room as well. Obviously, if one of these clients would join a different room through the rooms option up here, they wouldn't be able to see this message because the rooms basically block off the messages from one another. But first let's get into roll or flip, sorry. So I'm just going to flip as David, and as you can see, a simple message prints out saying David has flipped a coin and got tails. I could also do this as a Joe. I could also say flip as well, and then it says the same thing. Joe has flipped a coin and got heads. And now it broadcasts throughout the entire thing. So how does this code specifically function, you might be asking? So a basic summarization of it is that the flip command begins within the client file when the client themselves send the flip command. So as you can see, like when I just typed in like slash flip, that was the command itself. And then this invokes the send flip method within the client file. And then this method creates a payload with the flip type, or basically a payload named like flip, or and then this flip case then specifically triggers a handle flip result within the room method. And then here is basically when the room or the server randomly determines the result of the coin flip by either using heads or tails using the math random. And the math random itself specifically, it generates a random value between 0 and 1. And if the number itself is less than 0.5, the result is heads. Otherwise, if it's obviously more than 0.5, the result is tails. And then this simulates like a real life coin flip because obviously coin flip is supposed to be equal, like it's either like 50-50 either way. And then flipped coin result, which is a variable within the handle flip result method. The flipped coin result basically stores the outcome of the coin as either heads or tails, and then once the result itself has been determined, or basically once the handle flip result is like finished doing what it's doing, once the result itself has been handled, the server constructs a message containing the client's name and the flip result. So that's how it's able to identify how come Joe specifically has flipped a coin and also gotten this specific result. And then another thing, the this message is then passed into the send flip result method, which is also inside of the room, or which is also inside of the room file, which then formats it with the sender's name and the flip outcome. And then the method sends this message to the other clients within the current room, informing them of the flip result. So that is the general overview of the flip command itself. So now I'm going to try the two different formats of roll. So as you can see, here's roll 1, and here's also roll second version. Now you may notice that it may seem a bit weird, as in like where is it happening inside of the UI. In reality, it's actually still occurring, as you could see. It's right here, received from my client, or rather it's instead happening inside of the actual it's happening inside of the actual server itself, or rather, it should be functioning within the server. Okay, that seems a bit weird. Hold on, let me try again. Okay, that seems a bit weird, so guess I'll try to do a different command then. Since role seems to be unavailable, I'll discuss this later on. So instead, let's try to format some text. So let's say I wanted to format something in blue and then I just want to say blue. So let me just demonstrate it real quick. I just want to make sure I'm doing this properly. Alright, there we go. So what just happened? So what happened specifically is that I just used my change message format inside of my room file, and basically what it does specifically is that the change message method is basically responsible for transforming specific placeholders like the placeholders inside of the message into HTML tags for formatting. So what these placeholders are basically these specific like tags right here. So let's say just for example's sake, let's just do this as well. So those specific characters, these ones, are sorry. So these act as placeholders, and now you might be asking placeholders for what specifically. Basically, when the user inputs these tags, or rather these placeholders, for instance, when they surround a piece of text with these two tags in order to initiate the red HTML, in order to initiate the switching with the actual tags right here, the placeholders with an actual HTML tag or an actual HTML format, basically. Sorry, give me a moment. Okay. So to actually reiterate, when the user actually inputs the proper tags for the actual desired HTML like alterations, such as these tags for red, the previous tags as you've seen for blue, when they actually implement these tags, the change message method actually then turns the message itself into blue text. More specifically, the method itself recognizes the placeholders like the red placeholder or the red tags and the blue tags as well, for and the same thing for green or for any of the other formats. If I could possibly show you here, I'll do a bold one just so let me say hello. And there we go, it's in bold right here. It then replaces these tags with the corresponding HTML font color tags, which is a phenomenal thing itself. And then basically the way it does it is that the way I programmed it was that it basically has two arrays and then it inputs, or rather it takes in the message itself, and then within the array it replaces these tags, as I mentioned earlier, with the actual appropriate HTML tags or the fonts, which then changes the actual appearance and aesthetics of the message itself. So now I'm going to try and do another thing, which is now private messaging. So now I'm going to say at Joe, yeah. So I'm David saying at Joe, hello. And as you can see, and oh my, oh okay, my apologies. I thought something weird happened. Here, let's just demonstrate it again, just in case if you guys might have missed something. This is a private message. There we go. So as you can see, Bob, who is not being added, does not see any of the private messages at all whatsoever. And so how does this function overall? Basically, the private messaging system is designed to allow users to actually send messages directly to other users within the room. And the way that it's actually initiated is starts off in the client side, when any message starts off with an at symbol, for instance, like this, and then basically the system itself recognizes this as a private message command, and then it splits the message into two ports, and then first of all the target username and the actual message. So the first port of it would be the username. So let's say I'm saying I'm trying to send a message specifically to Joe. I would say at Joe. The system now is understanding that the ID, or that the person I'm trying to send this to, is Joe specifically, as it's being connected with, or basically it's right next to the at symbol itself. So it uses specifically the sorry, it uses the client ID by using the find client ID method within the actual code itself. And if the user is genuinely found, the private message is then forwarded to them. If the user doesn't exist within the room, however, or if the user isn't found either, the message also prints out how come the user doesn't exist. And if the user doesn't exist, obviously the error message pops out. So the private message method handles sending the message to the intended recipient, ensuring that only it gets delivered to the specific recipient. On the server side, or the room side itself, the handle private message method checks if the target client is muted by the sender. So for instance, let me just try to do it real quick. So let me just try to mute Joe real quick. Joe. So I'm not sure. So if I think, okay, so I could still send messages to Joe. My apologies. It's just more. Oh, sorry. It's just. Sorry, I made a mistake. It's actually more like the opposite. It actually checks if the user can genuinely send messages towards somebody, unless if they themselves have been muted. So for instance, if I was Joe right now and I would try to privately message David, for instance, saying hello, or saying hi, this is Joe, this would not respond. But as you can see, it's right here. You can see this error message pop up within the terminal saying how come he should try it with a different user, which is the error message that I left out specifically, which then genuinely show excuse me, which then shows how come, like, in the handle private message method, it actually does check if the user has been muted by the recipient and if they can actually send the message towards the recipient in the first place. However, if they are not muted, or basically if they're like, able to genuinely communicate with the actual recipient, then the message is formatted using the change message method to apply any necessary text formatting, like possibly bold or italics, and it is then sent to both the sender and the recipient, which also ensures that private messages basically respect the mute status of the clients and are delivered in the proper format. Now, finally, we are going to talk about the mute and unmute functionality. So, mute and unmute specifically, or the mute and unmute commands, also stored within the client side. They allow users to restrict others from sending messages, and the handle mute command method on the server side, or the room, basically handles the mute process. When a sender issues the /mute command, and then follows it up with a username, the command itself inside of the client file, the system then finds the target user in the room using their client ID. If the user or the target themselves is actually found, the sender can mute them by adding their name to the muted client list. And then a message is sent to the sender confirming the action, which basically says here, I'll demonstrate it right here. Just as I had shown before, I'm gonna say mute Joe, it's now picking up on the fact that I'm starting off my command and my message with mute. So then it's obviously going to start sending over the payload, and also, sorry, it's also going to start sending over to the room how come this user Joe has been muted, and now he's going to be added specifically onto the muted list, or the muted client list specifically. And then now if I would have simply put this in, this message confirming the fact that Joe has been muted gets outputted to me specifically, and now I can actually be sure that Joe has been muted. So to follow up with this, if the user is already muted, a message will also show up saying that the sender has already been muted. So if I try to mute Joe again, oh wait, sorry, mute Joe. See, it should say, see, as you can see right down here, it says this user is already muted down here in the terminal. So that's the server itself telling me how come already Joe has been muted, so there's no reason for me to continuously try to mute him again and again and again. So now, okay. For the same thing, the same logic also applies for the unmute command, as you can see. Oh wait, sorry. I should unmute Joe. A message pops up displaying how come I've unmuted Joe, and now Joe should be able to privately message me again. So I'm going to say at David, hello, David. And now again, hello, David is actually able to receive messages from Joe because he has unmuted Joe himself, and only Joe and David can see this message. Bob is not seeing any of this. So now that Joe has been unmuted by David, hold on, sorry, just gotta stick to my script. This is managed by the, which checks, okay, the handle on, yeah. Okay, so sorry. The handle unmute command also, the method itself, or sorry, the handle unmute command method also handles unmuting and removing the target user from the muted client list, and confirming the action to the sender. If the user isn't found in the room, an error message also pops up. Okay. Another feature about the mute functionality is that it works by checking if the user is muted before allowing them to send messages to the muted user. This is managed by the isClientMuted method, which then checks the muted client list to see if the client is muted. If the sender tries to send a private message to a muted user, they are blocked with an error message and the message is not delivered. This ensures that muted users are prevented from receiving any further messages until they are unmuted, or sending any messages as well. Or rather, they can. Right. So finally, some of the server-side management, or basically the room-side management as well. The logic for muting and unmuting is handled through the added muted client, remove muted client, and also the isClientMuted methods. These methods maintain the muted state for each client and ensure that the muted users cannot send messages towards others. When a client when a mute and unmute command is processed, the relevant user is added or removed from the muted client list, which is stored in a hash set for fast lookups. The handle mute command and the handle unmute command methods ensure that the state changes are reflected immediately, and both the sender and the target user are informed of the result. This server side, or server thread management, ensures that the mute functionality is robust and that users' actions are processed correctly. So that is all that I have for right now, Professor, and I hope you enjoyed this recording.